Hi guys and welcome back. So in today's video I am going to be showing you how I am harvesting and dehydrating nettles. So anytime from about March to May and then again in September you've got new growth of nettles, so that's when they are growing at their most prolific, and that's the best time to harvest them because you get the most tender leaves. So certainly if you're going to be cooking them when they're fresh, then that's the best time of year to harvest them. I harvest them all throughout the summer because I'm not bothered about having the most tender leaves. They are so tasty and so nutrient dense that, to be honest, I'd eat them anyway they came. But also I'm going to be dehydrating them and powdering them down to make into a sort of instant nettle cuppa soup type idea. So the purpose with this is that both myself and my husband eat soup for lunch and for packed lunches and things, and I was thinking about how I could make use of the abundance of free and very nutrient dense stinging nettles that we have here locally, and obviously it's free food. I'm never going to turn down free food, and I also have a large crop of onions and garlic that I'm planting this year. I primarily planted them as a pest control mechanism because the smell of onion and garlic around the other plants turns off a lot of leaf eating pests, but I also want to find the best way of storing them and making use of them. So dehydrating them and forming onion powder and garlic powder and combining it with nettle powder to form basically a nettle soup broth that is powdered and I can keep in airtight jars throughout the year, and that we can open a new jar and just pop a few in a mug with some boiling water in the office and have a quick nutrient dense cuppa soup that's essentially free. So that's the plan. So I have been out and harvested a bag full of nettle tops. So when harvesting stinging nettles, I find that 2 pairs of gloves actually works better than 1 at avoiding being stung. So nettles have very thin hairs on them, which is how they pierce the skin, like little tiny needle pricks, and deliver the venom that causes the histamine reaction, the swelling and the itching and so on. So there's 2 things that I think are best to do to avoid being bothered by the fact that you're getting stung and avoid getting stung at all if possible. So the first is to double up the gloves that you're wearing. So I had a pair of latex gloves that I was given, which were under my sink, and my gardening gloves. Last year I used my husband's rubber coated work gloves. It's a very heavy duty sort of builder's gloves for lifting and carrying heavy things, and because they've got this thick rubber coating, they work quite well as well. But also just a regular pair of washing up rubber gloves if you have those, and chuck in another pair of gloves like gardening gloves on over the top. That dual layer helps to sort of bend the hair so that it makes it very difficult for them to pierce through both layers and straight into your skin, so that helps to avoid getting stung. The other thing I would say to avoid getting stung is to make sure that you're wearing appropriate clothing. So make sure that you've got on good boots, long trousers, and ideally long sleeves as well, so that your skin is covered from accidentally brushing against any of the nettles in the patch that you're harvesting. The nettles that I harvest are generally quite tall, and so you're having to sort of step into them to get away from the edge that's exposed, because the area where I harvest them from, everyone walks their dogs, and dogs are known to cock a leg against these sticky nettles sometimes, to much amusement, but I don't obviously want to pick those leaves. I want to pick the leaves that are further into the patch. So being able to walk into the patch with thick trousers and thick boots on, and get at the nettles that are further away that won't have been contaminated in that way is ideal for me. I also find that the most new shoot, the most new growth on the nettles tends to happen in thick crowded areas in the middle of the patch. Where the nettles are having to fight a bit more for resources like light, and that's where you'll often get the new and most tender leaves from. So the other thing is dock leaves. So dock leaves are a broad-leafed weed essentially that grows in the wild, and you usually find it near stinging nettles. And spitting on a bit of dock leaf and putting it over a patch that has been stung by nettles really helps in terms of soothing the histamine reaction. So that is another thing to do if you do get stung, but ideally try not to get stung in the first place, and that just makes life happier. There's also the old adage that says if you grasp the nettle firmly, and this is basically because of the way the tiny hairs work, that if you crush them by grabbing onto the nettle firmly, they can't sting you. The leaves are also only one-sided with the needle points, so making sure that you grab them from underneath rather than from on top can also help to avoid getting stung. So where will you find nettles? Well, nettles often grow in old abandoned industrial lots and things in urban settings. So where I actually am going for mine is around the edges of the local sort of sports playing field and Scouts club area where the football and things happens. And along the sides of that field there are big patches of nettles. So they look for areas where there has been a lot of debris and things of interest for them in terms of their nutrient gathering, but they also want to be in areas which are boggy wet. They like to have their feet wet, so any area that doesn't drain well. And this is the reason that often in sort of empty industrial lots and things in urban settings got a lot of nettles, is because there's a thin layer of soil over concrete, which means that the water has nowhere to go. It sort of sits and they keep the feet wet, and that's what nettles like. So finding a patch of stinging nettles and knowing that you can go back there throughout the year is a great resource, local resource to go out and discover for yourself. So I always cut the tips from the nettle plant, so I'm going to get my gloves on and show you what that looks like. So when I'm harvesting nettles, I like to take the nettle top like this, and if you can see here, each area where the nettle forks, you end up with a V with two leaves that come out, and then it alternates as you twist it round, and the next set of leaves comes out at the opposite angles. So you get two on each side and they alternate their way up. So when I cut my tips, I like to cut just above the next V, so that there's a little V here, and I cut just here above that and take the top. So I usually take the top couple of inches, and that is the most tender new leaf growth. And then because you've cut at an intersection, the plant can then continue to sprout up from that intersection and will continue to grow throughout the season. So you're not actually killing the plant by taking the tip like this. So now that I have gathered my nettles, I've got a sink full of cold water here. I'm simply going to take each of the leaves off. I don't want the stems for this project, so I'm simply going to take the leaves off, and I am going to wash them in the water just to make sure that anything that has come into contact with them is rinsed off, basically. Because I got them from the middle of a patch and in an area where they're not spraying pesticides or anything like that, they're likely to be relatively clean, but at the same time you want to make sure that, you know, they're just nice and sanitary before dehydrating them. So I'm going to take the leaves off, put the leaves all in the cold water. I'm going to use my colander as a bit of a sort of salad spinner to get the most of the water off, and then I'm going to put them in the racks of my dehydrator, and I'm going to just put them on to dehydrate overnight. In the morning the leaves will be nice and crisp and crackly, and all I'll do then is take them out of here, at which point they no longer sting, and put them into a bowl and crumble them up into a fine sort of tea leaf type consistency, and from there I'll probably put them in the food processor to try and get them down into a very fine powder. If the food processor doesn't work, I might need to try the pestle and mortar, but really I'm just getting them as fine as possible. I'm not really that bothered. I'm just hoping that once the onions and the garlic and the nettle are all dehydrated, I can get them to a relatively similar grain size so that they will mix nicely and not keep separating out into different heaviness, different weights of ingredient. So that's the project, so I'm going to get started.